This episode of Warp 5 is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/TrekFM. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the non-profit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join in on the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode or any other, please join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, that's B-A-B-E-L, into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
Hi, this is Tucker Smallwood from Star Trek Enterprise. You're listening to Trek.fm.
How we doing, Trip? Ready when you are. Prepare for warp.
Course laid in, sir. Request permission to get underway. Let's go.
Welcome, Boomers, to another episode of Warp 5, Trek FM's dedicated Enterprise show. I'm your host for today, Brandon Shamatella. Floyd is still away on his secret Section 31 mission, but we've got a fun little conversation for you with a couple of new voices for Warp 5. I don't think either of them have been on here before. One of them I know hasn't, but the other one I'm not too sure. We've got Uber Enterprise fan and friend of the network, Brandon Coles. How are you doing, Brandon?
Doing great, Brandon.
Thank you. Brandon. So B1 and B2. So thanks for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. So you've been a listener of the show for quite a while, and you're a big Enterprise fan. When did you first discover Star Trek Enterprise?
I watched it when it was first on there.
Excellent. Right on. And so you always liked it, or was it something that had to grow on you?
I always liked it, and I liked the song as well. But because of their contradictions and retconning, I sort of had to separate it from the rest of the Star Trek universe for a little while.
So you think it's a separate timeline?
No. It's came into the prime timeline for me now, after the books I read.
Okay, right on. And also joining us today from Trek FM's own show, Stage 9, is Mike Schindler. How are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing okay. How are you? Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for joining us. I'm doing just fine. It was a nice warm day here at work, and I got to read in my van on my lunch break and listen to some music, and it was great. So,
cool.
We're having a fun episode for you tonight. We did it a little while ago, something similar to this. We had John Tenuto on, and we compared the Enterprise episode Dawn to the science fiction movie Enemy Mine, and we're going to do that again tonight, but we're going to do it with a different set of movies and different set of episodes. Tonight we're going to be comparing the second season episode Marauders to the Western, The Magnificent Seven, and we're also going to touch on Seven Samurai a little bit, because The Magnificent Seven is actually a remake of the old Japanese film directed by Akira Kurosawa called Seven Samurai. And I think Seven Samurai is probably my favorite movie of all time. I've seen it probably 50 times, and it's an absolute masterpiece. And I thought it was quite interesting when we were doing our From There to Here rewatch, because I hadn't seen Marauders in quite a long time, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, This is the Magnificent Seven, just done in space. And I had said that during our From There to Here rewatch, and so I've had this idea in the back of my mind for a little while here. Mike, do you want to give us a summary of Seven Samurai?
Sure. Seven Samurai is a movie about a village which is being terrorized by a baron or something, some guy who basically is forcing this town of farmers to hand over their crops to him or whatever. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. It's been a while since I've seen the movie. And, basically some of the people in the town are like, this isn't good. We need to stand up for ourselves, but at the same time, we're not samurai or warriors or anything like that. who can fight off these guys, so we need to hire some samurai to defend us. So they go out looking for some samurai, and they find a group of
about 7 of them.
Yeah, like 7 samurai who are, maybe down on their luck, and maybe, they're not the best in the world, but they're willing to do this for various reasons, and they try to fend off the evil people who are stealing their crops, and hijinks ensue.
Mm-hmm. Now, Magnificent Seven, remake of it, takes place in Mexico instead of Japan, and in a nutshell, it's basically the same thing. We got a group of Mexican farmers who grow corn, and they got these bandits that come every year and take as much of their corn as they can, and they get tired of it, so they decide to hire some gunslingers. And actually, it's a little different than Seven Samurai, because in Seven Samurai they're specifically sent out to hire the samurai, and in Magnificent Seven they're sent out to buy some guns, and they end up hiring out these gunslingers instead. So they hire about 7 of them, somewhere around there, and they come down and they try and protect their farm. And there's a little bit of differences between the two. It's a little bit of a modern take on it. Rather than just paying them food, they actually do pay them the sum of $20 each, and hijinks ensue. Now, Brandon Coles, did you want to give us a summary of the episode Marauders?
Episode Marauders is it's basically the same thing, but nobody dies in the episode. There's a Klingon Korark. Is that how you pronounce it?
Works for me.
And he's coming trying to take all their deuterium, and the colonists are fed up with it, and the crew of the Enterprise help out with it.
Basically, in a nutshell, it's the same kind of thing, except the Enterprise is there to buy goods rather than being hired. They're there to buy the deuterium, and the miners don't really want them around, but they ask them for some help to fix some of their parts, and they decide to stick around and help them defend their deuterium mine, because they're supposed to be making a lot of money and they're not, and hijinks ensue. And it's a little bit more tame because it's a TV version. It's a little bit trimmed down from. The Seven Samurai is 3.5 hours long. And Magnificent Seven's just over 2 hours, and Marauders, when you take out the theme song, is 40 minutes. Yeah, so it trims it down a little bit. But based on that, you guys think that this is a pretty fair comparison? Do you think Marauders would be a remake of Magnificent Seven?
Yeah, I think for sure. There's no way that they can deny that it was inspired, by the Magnificent Seven or Seven Samurai, and it's certainly altered in a few key ways in order to sort of like fit inside the Star Trek box, in a sense. It's kind of interesting how they flip it in terms of in the movie, the villagers need to convince the samurai or the gunslingers to help them. Whereas in this, it's the gunslingers convincing the villagers to let them help, And so that's kind of an interesting flip and stuff like that. But I think there's no way that it wasn't, sort of like an inspiration. There's no way that someone in that writer's room wasn't like, let's do Magnificent Seven in space, That's definitely how it went down,
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, you're kind of the guy that knows the behind the scenes and the movie credits and how everybody gets credited on things. So this is given a story by Brannon Braga and Rick Berman and a teleplay by David Wilcox. So if I understand this correctly, so it's Rick Berman and Brannon Braga saying, hey, this is our idea, Magnificent Seven in space, and then David Wilcox takes that idea and makes a story out of it. Is that correct?
I would assume. It's really complicated, especially in TV, because they've got the writer's room and everything, and lots of times there will be, like people will write a draft, and then that draft will be taken and given to someone else and modified so much that it basically doesn't look like anything like the first draft did that the other people wrote, except for, like an idea, maybe the Magnificent Seven in space. And, they go back and forth with that, whatever. But given the fact that, like, Berman and Braga were like the creators of the show and everything like that, and David Wilcox is not. I have a feeling what happened in this particular instance, and this is just a total guess on my part, is that Berman and Braga were coming up with ideas for the show, probably a bunch of ideas for the show for different episodes, and this was one that they came up with. Probably started off with one of them saying Magnificent Seven in space, and then from there they were like, but we could alter it where blah 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 blah, and then they came up with this idea, and then they basically said, like, we can't write 26 episodes ourselves. Yo, David, here, take this idea and flesh it out, expand it, turn it into a screenplay. And then that's where Wilcox came in and did it. And I'm sure, like, the way that writers' rooms work and everything like that, I'm sure once Wilcox finished his draft or whatever, he gave it back to, Braga, and Braga probably did a final polish on it, as he would have probably done with all the scripts for that season,
I guess the thing that surprises me is seeing something like this where, to me, it's so obvious that this is inspired by, the Magnificent Seven, which is inspired by by Seven Samurai. How come there's no credit given on screen inspired by this story? I guess that's the only thing I don't know. I don't know if you know that end of it, but that's something that surprises me when you see something that's clearly influenced by another piece of work.
I think it's a case of a few things. One, I mean, everything's inspired by something. Maybe this one's a bit clearer than, others, but you could still say that it's generic enough that it wouldn't, like, hold up in, like, arbitration or whatever. Two, I'm sure there's a rights issue. And three, I'm sure there's a money issue. So, all of those things probably come into play. But, I mean, it's not like a one-to-one thing. I think it's far enough away that, they can get away with saying, yes, it's inspired by, but it's by no means like a ripoff,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, Brandon, how do you think this translated into Enterprise after watching The Magnificent Seven? Do you think it works in the television format? Do you think it's strange that there is no killing and no violence? Because in Magnificent Seven, I mean, they basically kill all the invaders throughout the movie. Spoilers. And in Marauders, they don't kill anybody.
Yeah, I think it works for Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there could have been a little more drama with it. But it works fine for Star Trek.
It's interesting because, like, especially with Seven Samurai, like, a lot of that movie is spent assembling the team, And here the team's already assembled, so that whole side of it is just kind of, like, gone and sort of replaced with, them saying, like, let us help you, let us help you figure this out. And that sort of, like, conflict there. So the focus is really shifted to sort of like the end battle, but given the politics of it all and everything like that, I think they were really in a place where they couldn't really have anyone die, aside from maybe like some colonists, right?
Or
but
the
like,
Klingons is what I mean, mostly. Like, not the main characters, but the Klingons.
I mean, I think
like
that if they would have killed a Klingon, right? Then there'd be all sorts of, like, because there's a whole thing where they're like, can we get involved? Because the Klingons did this and that, and, well, but are these guys really part of the Empire? That sort of thing. Like, I don't know. I get the impression that they were really trying to not kill any Klingons here.
Yeah, me too.
I don't think the Klingons were really aware of Archer and his crew, except Paul, because she knocked one on their butt.
But even wasn't she wearing, like, one of the little...
She was wearing a headset.
And she was dressed up like the colonists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And covering up her ears. Yeah.
We haven't seen that before. That's a great new thing to see in Star Trek.
Well, chronologically speaking, it's the first time, probably, right?
Yeah.
But I guess I'm just surprised that they don't kill any Klingons in it. I mean, it's Star Trek, but I mean, these Klingons have killed 4 of these colonists already, right? So we know, and maybe it's just told this is how bad these Klingons are, that they've killed 4 of these people, and they show the one scene where he's walking, he's like, oh, maybe I'll kill the boy this time, I'm a Klingon. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, so it's interesting that they tell the story without the death of anybody, any villains even.
I don't know. I think given the story, given the place in the overall story of Enterprise and everything like that, I mean, they weren't really hardcore into the killing of people yet. That didn't come until season 3. But I mean, it's like, because like they made a big deal out of like no crew members dying, even and all that stuff. And I think in a lot of ways, Enterprise started off much tamer in that department than maybe the other series did, and I think that was intentional. And I think like they really sort of made a big deal. Like anytime someone dies, it's a big deal,
Right.
And this is kind of a nothing episode in a lot of ways. It's a bottle show, it doesn't really have a greater impact, going forward or anything like that. So I think that it would have felt out of place in the rest of the series if like people were dying,
So do you think that the storyline would have changed had this taken place after Archer got back from the Xindi conflict?
Possibly. If it had more to do with a threat to Earth, it would have.
That would have been an interesting like take on it. Like if they had decided to
set if the Klingons would have been Xindi.
Right. Set it in the Xindi arc. That would have been, I think, a much different story. Like, I mean, like, well, American Brandon, what do you think this episode would have been like if it had been in season 3? Like, if it had been in The Expanse?
I think Archer and the Mechos would have killed them all.
Probably, right?
And then he would have regretted it later.
I guess that's kind of their thing, right? I don't know. That would have been interesting. I mean, obviously, that's nothing that they were thinking about like this early on in season 2, probably. But I wonder, like, if they had waited till season 3, if this would have been a better episode or a worse episode or what,
Now, comparing the episode itself to the movie, was there any scenes or any takes or any camera angles or anything like that made you harken back to the Magnificent Seven after watching Marauders? Was there anything you're like, hey, they took that right from the movie or anything like that?
It was Trip. Trip bonded with that boy, Kel. And Charles Bronson's character, O'Reilly, bonded with those 3 Mexican boys. And that reminded me of the movie a whole lot.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's a good point.
Then the training of the fighters and the defense training by Paul and Travis.
Yeah, it seems like movies like this, they've always got a scene of that lineup of people and like that person walking in front of them, training them, saying, you got to do this and you have to behave this way and be careful, but don't do it this way. And you just got to practice. And like they did that even in, Seven Samurai as well. There's a scene like that where one of the samurai warriors is just walking up and down the line of them, talking to them and, coaching them.
There's one guy in the line who's not hearing any of it, and then they say like, hey, you better watch out or else. And then that's the person who later on in the movie does that one thing in order to save everyone or whatever. That is interesting. I hadn't thought about the relationship with the boy and how that mirrored it. The similarities are so obvious in terms of the plot and everything later on that I think the thing that really struck me more than anything were the differences in getting to that point, and how they did really flip the roles and have it be, the gunslingers convincing the town instead of the other way around.
One of the main differences that I noticed as the story got condensed as well is in Seven Samurai, they spend so much time on prepping the village. Like, I'm sure there's like an hour of that movie is them prepping the village. They go around with that map, and then they flood the area, and they're building this and that, and it takes quite a fair chunk of that movie, but to do that. And in Magnificent Seven, it's condensed quite a bit because they don't flood anything, right? Because they're in the desert of Mexico or whatever it is. But they build some walls and they build a few things, but it's quite condensed. And in this too, I mean, because it's only a 40-minute show, you got to condense it even more. So that was one interesting thing that I missed from Seven Samurai is how much time it took them to prep the village.
That's true. Yeah, here they just like kind of set up that fire thing or whatever it was, and then called it a day.
Well, they moved the hut things over a little bit.
Oh yeah, because and then there's that part where like the Klingons are like, "This isn't supposed to be here," right? Yeah, yeah.
And then fire. Yeah, everything gets moved 50 meters south. In this.
Okay, yeah. It's an interesting, look at it in terms of like format and everything. I mean, like you're saying, Canadian Brandon, Seven Samurai, like is literally like 5 times as long as this episode, like literally.
Right. Yeah.
And you look at even Magnificent Seven, it's like 3 times as long as this episode, and with each of those adaptations, things are cut or whatever, and emphasis is placed in certain ways and not others and everything. And it's interesting how you can tell the same story in different ways and using different techniques or whatever, and to the same effect, or using the basic outline of that story in order to sort of impart like a different message. Whereas like Magnificent Seven is sort of like all about like redemption for these people, like the gunslingers. This movie is not about that at all. It's more about like helping out these people in need and kind of like showing them that they're not alone. Whereas maybe that's true in the other way around in some ways for the movies.
Right on. So, Brandon, any final thoughts on the movie and episode comparison here?
I first watched Magnificent Seven 20 years ago, I guess, and I think it stands up as a classic. Sometime I need to watch the 3-hour-long Seven Samurai, but I just couldn't this time.
Just so you know, there's an intermission in the middle of it, so you could watch it over 2 nights, right? There's actual intermission right in the middle of it. It's a good time to take a break if you want to treat it like a mini series or something like that.
It's still really long. It's
my favorite quote. I can't get it. I'm paraphrasing. Is when Archer said, "I don't like bullies. I didn't like them on Earth, and I don't like them out here."
Yep.
And that's I like to share that quote a lot sometimes on social media.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that.
So what would your final ratings be for the episode and the movie?
Movie is A+.
Yep.
Marauders is a B.
Just an average episode for you?
Yes.
Yeah, good, right on. Michael, any final thoughts?
Well, it was interesting doing the comparison because, I mean, like you, Canadian Brandon, I didn't necessarily pick up on the similarities between the two, out of context. Like, I mean, I saw the episode when it was on, and I've watched it in various rewatches. But the first time I ever really examined it was for another podcast. Apparently, this is just I'm being typecast by Enterprise podcast. Whenever they talk about Marauders, they want me to come on for some reason. And like watching it that time, it was weird because like I didn't think about Magnificent Seven at all. I was just kind of looking at it in the context of Enterprise, and it was interesting in that sense. But now looking at it as a Magnificent Seven, sort of like remake, it really sort of made me question like a lot of the choices which were made early on in the episode, the setup, not so much like the ending. And it was interesting. And it also made me think a lot about the other Star Trek episode, which is a Magnificent Seven remake, which I can't believe no one has brought up.
Oh my goodness, yes.
But the Magnificent Ferengi, obviously.
It's not necessarily a remake because there's a lot of elements, and that one is definitely more inspired by the Magnificent Seven than Seven Samurai.
Yeah,
right.
But here's the thing, right? While the climax of the movie and everything, and you could say maybe the heart of the movie, or the episode is inspired by the Magnificent Seven, like the beginning of the Magnificent Seven is really where the Magnificent Ferengi takes its cue. It
Right.
really is about assembling this team of, misfits who don't want to do this and who are doing it for, various reasons which are probably against their better judgment, and, going in and taking on this thing, even though the premise of, like what it is they're going to do is different from, what we see like here and in the Magnificent Seven. But I almost want to do a double feature, or maybe a triple feature, where you watch the Magnificent Seven and then the Magnificent Ferengi for the beginning of the Magnificent Seven, and Marauders for the end of Magnificent Seven,
And then the Seven Samurai, because it's the best.
I mean, that's a thing which, you said, and most people would probably agree with, but I'm not necessarily one of those people. So,
Oh, my goodness.
there you go.
Yeah, you're right, because in Magnificent Ferengi, they're doing the finger motion of every time they add somebody, they hold up their fingers for the counting. We have 3, we have 4.
Yeah.
Right, and they do that in this one, and they don't do that in Seven Samurai.
No, even like the recruiting of the people, and then like even in like the staging where it's got like all of them lined up and everything. I mean, that episode is like really playing on sort of like the almost like iconic, like stereotypical Western, tropes, and saying like, we're having fun with this, guys. Look, it's a Western, but they're a bunch of Ferengi, I mean, whereas like with this one, it's more like, story-wise, it gets it, but it's not, like visually speaking, you don't, see a guy on a horse riding off in the sunset or anything like that, but it's still definitely a Western, as well. It's interesting. 2 different takes, 2 different Star Trek episodes with, this one's a drama, the other one's a comedy, inspired by the same movie, but in different ways. It's interesting.
You didn't think Marauders was very funny?
Not intentionally, no.
So how would you rate Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, and Marauders?
Okay, if we're doing like a 4-star scale,
Sure.
okay, I would give Seven Samurai 3 stars, and I would give Magnificent Seven 3 stars, and I'd give Marauders 3 stars. But there's different levels of 3 stars in each of those things. Like Magnificent Seven is like a high 3, Marauders is like a low 3, Seven Samurai is like a middle 3.
So Seven Samurai is 3 out of 5, Magnificent Seven is 3 out of 3, and Marauders is 3 out of 7.
I'm not sure that I would go that far with some of those ratings, but sure. Okay, let's do that. Let's do that then.
Well, my final thoughts on this, I think it's interesting, and I couldn't believe that I'd never seen the comparison before until this rewatch, right? I mean, I haven't seen the episode many times, but even when it originally aired, I watched it, and I can't believe I didn't see the comparison to, Seven Samurai at least. I hadn't seen Magnificent Seven at the time, but I couldn't believe I didn't see the comparison. I like it a lot. I think it's fun when people do this. I think it's fun when they take an inspiration from a classic movie and they write something modern for it, something different to fit it into their universe. The one line that I really like in this one that I also question as well is, I like when Archer brings up the line, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish and he'll eat for the rest of his life. I really like that line in general. I like it a lot, and I think I hold that dear to my heart, and I've said it many times to people as well. But I question whether or not they're going to survive when the Klingons come back the next time. Like, in Seven Samurai, all the samurai invaders are dead, and in Magnificent Seven, all the Mexican invaders are dead, and in this, the Klingons are still alive. And I think I could just picture them warping out of the system and going back, and like, wait a minute, screw these people. They come back and just blow them all away, right? Like, I don't know.
Like Enterprise leaves, and the colonists are like, I thought you were going to teach us how to fish, dude. Wait.
We didn't learn how to fish. I misunderstood what he meant.
Oh, well.
So, I would give Seven Samurai, I got to give that a 5 out of 5. Magnificent Seven, I give a 4 out of 5. And Marauders, I'd probably give a 2.5 out of 5. I think it's a rate average episode of Enterprise myself. So, Excellent, though. Brandon, where can people find you online?
I'm on Twitter at PackerBAC. On Facebook, I'm in the Babel Conference, and I have a Facebook group called Captain Jonathan Archer's Dining Room.
Mm-hmm. And for those that are not watching video here, you missed at the beginning here when Brandon put the cheese on his head.
Packers
Cheesehead.
Yeah,
Packer
fans,
fan.
you know. Mm.
They had to explain to me that Wisconsin apparently has good cheese.
I feel bad for you, Canadian Brandon, for not knowing about Wisconsin's cheese, and I'm assuming because of that, not experiencing Wisconsin's cheese. But if you ever come south of the border, I mean, that's like the first thing you'll hit. So definitely go to the Mars Cheese Castle and get yourself some cheese.
Excellent, right on. Mike, where can people find you?
You can find me right here on Trek.fm doing Stage 9, where we talk about the people who make Star Trek, and you can find me on a few other podcasts scattered throughout the internet. And if you go to episode 17 of Stage 9, we talk about more specifically the new Magnificent Seven, the remake, and the music in that by James Horner. But we also talk about the other films as well and everything. So head on over there and check that out. And you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K.
Excellent. What about are you doing any Soderbergh work right now?
Oh, yeah, Soderbergh 2828 on Talk Film Society, where we're talking about all of Steven Soderbergh's movies leading up to the release of Logan Lucky. And, we're more than halfway through right now. We just released an episode on Bubble, which is amazing, and we're going to be talking about The Good German very soon. So.
Is that what's next?
Yep.
See, okay, so I'm going to go off on a tangent here. So The Good German upset me, and I didn't finish it. I put it on and I didn't finish it, and I'll tell you why it upset me, and you tell me what you think. I've only watched like 5 minutes of the movie so far, and it upset me because he went through all this trouble of like recreating the lighting, recreating the film stock, using the cameras, doing everything he could to make this movie, filming it in 4:3, to make this movie look like a movie from the 50s, and every other word out of these people's mouth is the F word.
It was an interesting take. I mean, I think the idea was to do something with modern sensibilities, but using only the technology of the time. Like there's some camera movements and stuff which you wouldn't see back then, but which they could have done had they thought of them. So I don't know. It's I haven't seen it since the theater. I'm going to be watching it probably tomorrow or the next day. So I don't know. I can't speak to it exactly yet.
Okay.
But I'll listen. Tune in to Talk Film Society to hear my thoughts in a week or so.
I'll check it out. I'm too behind right now because I can't find a copy of Bubble or what was the one before? Eros. So I gotta find a copy of those to watch. But anyway, excellent. Right on. Well, talking about the Magnificent Seven and Steven Soderbergh, isn't that the only thing we've been doing here on the network this week? So take a listen to this clip and see what else you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Melodic Treks.
The way it slowly builds and then just crescendos and ends with an explosion. Anytime a movie starts with something exploding, you're going to be in for a good time. I mean, I'm really kind of obsessed with the way movies start.
Literary Treks.
McCoy eventually gets command of the Enterprise, and one of the reasons for this is that he makes little comments to Kirk occasionally about how he has a cushy job. He's got, this nice comfortable chair he can sit in. Because McCoy at this point, he's got a lot of people getting sick on the Enterprise. There's colds, there's broken legs or whatever. I mean, there's just, for some reason, sickbay is busy.
Stage 9, a podcast about the people who make Star Trek.
the thing that finally pushed me over the edge. This is going to sound so stupid. I've said this before. They were releasing a Superman versus Aliens comic book. And I was like, oh, I guess I better get ready for Superman versus Aliens and watch, the Alien movies.
The Ready Room.
Every major turn in Star Trek history has been an adjustment to get used to it. Even going into motion picture, when all people had done for 10 years was pray to their savior Gene to get a show back, to get it back. And even with all the changes and even the canon explanation for the changes, it was still a big change.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, please be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review if you think we've been doing a great job. We think we've been doing a great job, and that helps us out a lot by rating and reviewing the show. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 from our website or grab the RSS link. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place is to join in the larger conversation at the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Warp 5. That will come right to us. You can also find us on Twitter at Trek.fm and Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. Well, Floyd is always available in the Babel Conference as well, so that's probably the best place to find him. He's not available on Twitter. However, if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Brandon Matella. I'm also in the Facebook Babel Conference quite often, and if you want to find some of my other shows, I'm here on the network with Melodic Treks, which is all about the music of Star Trek, and I'm over on the Fandom Podcast Network with my friends Chris and Tom, where we have the show Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast, where we talk about Alfred Hitchcock's movies. And you can find that show on Twitter at Good Evening Pod, and we're also on Facebook. Just search Good Evening Podcast. If you'd like to help us keep all of our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM, that's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more. And that's all available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month, and we really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. And at this time, we'd like to thank our associate producers for Warp 5, Tim Cooper, Justin Ozer, and Michael Morrison. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We really appreciate your help. Well, that's all for this week, so we'll see you guys next time on another episode of Warp 5.